said, yes, sir. So far, they made sure I wasn't smuggling someone in from. I got pulled over in West Texas so they could look inside my car. He said, are you an American citizen? I said, yes. So far, they made sure I wasn't smuggling someone in from Mexico. I got pulled over in West Texas so they could look inside my car. He said, are you an American citizen? I said, yes, sir. So far, they made sure I wasn't smuggling someone in from Mexico. Someone willing to settle for America, 'cause there's nowhere else to go. I broke down in Louisiana and I had to thumb a ride. Got in the first car that pulled over. Can't be picky in the middle of the night. He said, baby, do you like to fool around? He said, baby, do you like to be touched? I said, maybe some other time. Fuck you very much. Stare at me wherever I go. I don't think they like my haircut. I don't think they like my clothes. I can't wait to get back to New York City, or at least when I walk down the street, no one ever hesitates to tell me exactly what they think of me. Pennsylvania, there was snow on the road. I parked in an empty lot where there was no one else around. But I guess I was taking up too much space as I was trying to get some sleep. 'Cause an officer came by anyway and told me I had to leave. Yeah, and every Saturday night there's a new set of laws, and every policeman comes equipped with extended clothes. There's 1,000 shades of white and 1,000 shades of black, but the same rule always applies. Smile pretty, watch your back. 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 Smile pretty, smile pretty. Pulled over in West Texas so they could look inside my car. He said, "Are you an American citizen?" I said, "Yes, sir." So far, they made sure I wasn't smuggling someone in from Mexico, someone willing to settle for America. There's nowhere else to go. I broke down in Louisiana and I had to thumb a ride. Got in the first car that pulled over. Can't be picky in the middle of the night. He said, "Baby, do you like to fool around?" He said, "Baby, do you like to be touched?" I said, "Maybe some other time. Fuck you very much." Stared me wherever I go. I don't think they like my haircut. I don't think they like my clothes. I can't wait to get back to New York City, or at least when I walk down the street, no one ever hesitates to tell me exactly what they think of me. There was snow on the road. I parked it in an empty lot where there was no one else around. But I guess I was taking up too much space as I was trying to get some sleep. 'Cause an officer came by anyway and told me I had to leave. Yeah, every second night there's a new set of laws, and every policeman comes equipped with extended clothes. There's 1,000 shades of white and 1,000 shades of black, but the same rule always applies. Smile pretty, watch your back. 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 Smile pretty, smile pretty.
Okay, I am back. It's 20 minutes after the top of the hour. Hope everything's well. I noticed a written message from my executive producer that we are back up live, which is fabulous. I'm not quite sure. Does that mean we were off? I'm certain everything is fine in that regard. And hopefully we're recording now, so I'll wait for a written message from himself that we are recording, and I will also look forward to a written message from any one of you out there as to how we're sounding right now. So do please let us know how quality of audio is coming along. We are live and recording. Thank you, Paul Pravara, my executive producer, without whom none of this could happen. He's been very patient with myself. Our grand madame, Ramona Halitha Henry, is turning in for the evening because she works for a living. We're lucky to keep her till midnight Eastern Standard Time. And dear lady, of course, is the closest thing we have to a chat room monitor on my closest thing to a chat room, my personal friends page, and of course is now taking off for the time being. And I mean, there's only so much of this anyone can stand. So aside from all of that, of course, I wish to thank all of you who are still with us or have rejoined us again as reassured as I am by my executive producer. Always good to hear from those who are listening in. And if none of you says anything, I'll just go forward talking, which is what I'll start doing now. Okay, first we'll address the issue of culture. And I have never seen a culture like the United States other than, well, actually I've seen cultures like the United States. And they are in Southwest Asia more than any other place, the Levantine, what Americans call the Middle East, particularly the House of Saud, but to a lesser extent, some other Arab nations. But mainly in the House of Saud is where I see exploitation of young boys. And so I cannot help but reflect on those cultures when I saw the documentary that premiered on HBO entitled Leaving Neverland, which be a devastating indictment of Michael Jackson. Now, of course, I'm going to refer, as I am wont to do, in a manner of Michael Jackson inclusive, his middle name. And I often include this with people because it's my training. It makes it easier, of course, to find them when you're dealing with many, many names in a registry, a levy, as we call it in the military, of various personnel. So I will refer to Michael Jackson as Michael Joseph Jackson, which is his full name. And I want to bring that to everyone's attention because it will probably help you in the future just to learn to speak to people about people by their full name, at least in an introductory fashion. So this new documentary leaves no room for doubt about the King of Pop's abuse of children. And, of course, I'm going to have to speak to the people who are not leaving Neverland. Because for them, Michael Jackson's star power hasn't dimmed even after damning new expositions of child molestation and pedophilia via this HBO documentary. And, of course, the Leaving Neverland documentary provided a detailed exploration of Michael Jackson's abuses while hinting at what happens when faith and fandom get blurred. So, Leaving Neverland is a disturbing but all too familiar tale of abuse excused by wealth and celebrity. And while I've exposed to you in the last, or opening, the first segment of this transmission, how wealth renders a man nigh impervious, celebrity is also in and of itself a kind of infrastructure. So the Michael Jackson expositions bring degrees of turmoil to other celebrities and has elicited or prompted, incited degrees of turmoil from Paris Jackson, Corey Feldman, and Oprah Winfrey, respectively. Now, Corey Feldman's new perspective, several days after Leaving Neverland premiered, he being Michael Jackson's longtime friend and defender, Even Corey Feldman has said he can no longer ignore the horrendous claims, as he described it. And Oprah's Neverland reckoning has come to pass. Oprah believest MJ's accusers. Winfrey sat down for an hour-long discussion with Michael Jackson's accusers after the second half of HBO's Leaving Neverland aired. Now, one of the great collective lies in recent years has been the varying degrees of shock displayed by the media and public as stories of the #MeToo movement have garnered headlines, as if the conditions described in the various accounts of abuse were something not widely known or even tacitly rationalized by audiences around this planet. The truth about casting couches and scummy entertainment executives has been an open secret for many, many decades. I may as well say forever. The truth be that many, many people have decided to still buy the music and go to the movies, even after singers beat the shit out of their girlfriends and directors rape young girls. And the truth be, many communities still cheer, defend, and protect individuals connected to everything from sexual assault to murder, as long as touchdowns and championships occur. So, celebrity is its own safe passage, to a great extent. The lie a lot of people want to tell themselves be this: we didn't know. It's the same lie the public desperately tries to cling to, even as they push to the back of their minds the uncomfortable knowledge of carrying around smartphones built with slave labor and wearing clothes sewn in sweatshop conditions. At the end of the day, there be a history of normal, everyday people valuing their creature comforts more than any concern or wise of where those comforts be coming from and the character of the individuals who bring those comforts to them. Now, many recent documentaries have looked back at major scandals of the 1990s and early aughts, the zeros of the 2000s, with the cultural zeitgeist of the time largely coming across as cringeworthy in how it handled things. Amazon's Lorena dissected how the John and Lorena Bobbitt cases became an instance where the media snickered at the thought of a sliced-off penis more than it analyzed the effects of spousal abuse and rape. After Lifetime surviving R. Kelly documented decades of sexual assault allegations against the R&B singer and the tepid responses from colleagues in the entertainment industry and authorities, prosecutors issued a 10-count indictment late last month alleging Kelly sexually abused 4 victims, 3 of them between the ages of 12 and 14, over a span of a dozen years. And in this context, HBO's Leaving Neverland, via devastating recounting by James Safechuck and Wade Robson of their sexual abuse by Michael Jackson, whom they met when they were just 9 and 5 years old, respectively. The most fascinating aspect of the 4-hour program be how their families were seduced into letting small children sleep in a grown man's bed, and whether these testimonials will for some be the damning confirmation of the long-standing child molestation allegations against Jackson himself. Now, Michael Jackson has been accused of molesting children multiple times, and each time his legacy survives. He settled with his first alleged victim out of court in 1993, and then went on to conduct one of the biggest global music tours in history 2 years later. Now, in 2005, he beat the charges levied against him in a widely publicized trial, stemming from a second set of allegations. When he died 4 years after that, his funeral was watched online by over 31 million Americans and attended in person by a who's who of famous musicians, politicians, actors, and athletes. Jackson was dead, but his music and the adoration of his fans would live on forever. Maybe the most beloved musician in history, a genre-jumping global icon, he was too big to fail. HBO's documentary, Leaving Neverland, could finally change all of that. Now, over 4 hours, in 2 parts, that documentary painted a damning, completely credible case alleging a long pattern of child sexual abuse perpetrated by Jackson. 2 men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, allege in harrowing interviews that after Jackson befriended them when they were children in the 1980s, they were sexually abused by the pop star. The 2 men's experiences be eerily similar. Both were groomed and spoiled by Jackson, who showered them with gifts, vacations, shopping trips, and most important of all, his attention. They were invited for extended stays, with or without family members, to Jackson's massive, isolated Southern California property, Neverland Ranch, where they'd sleep in the same bed as Jackson. And soon, both of them said Jackson taught them how to masturbate, showed them graphic pornography, and engaged in sexual acts with them, including kissing, fondling, and oral sex, all just for starters. Robson was 7, and Safechuck was 10 when they confirmed the abuse began. And I'm surprised Jackson waited that long. Now, Jackson sent faxes to Robson expressing his love for the young boy, whom he called Little One. The pop star called the boys home every day for years, and the 2 would talk for hours each and every time. And as Jackson got closer to Robson, the boy would grow further apart from his family, who had left Australia and moved to the United States so Wade, an aspiring performer, could take advantage of his connection to the pop star. And Jackson insisted that both boys not trust anyone other than he, including their own parents. Robson said that Jackson told him they would both go to jail if anyone found out what Jackson was doing. Now, Robson and Safechuck's testimony describe as a man, if we could dignify Jackson with that title, whose alleged abuse was premeditated and carefully planned. Jackson had some sort of alarm outside his bedroom that would go off if anyone was about to enter. He'd send the boys' parents away so that he could have access to the children at Neverland sans any supervision. The men confirmed that Jackson forced them to run drills to get dressed as fast as possible in case someone was about to walk in on them having sex. Their claims are as convincing as they be disturbing. Leaving Neverland leaves no doubt. It'd be a stunning and devastating indictment of Jackson, portraying this pop star as someone who manipulated young children and exploited his stature as a larger-than-life celebrity role model to prey on them over a long period of time. Jackson knew what he meant to these children, and he brainwashed them to such a degree that they didn't understand what was happening to them was wrong. In 2005, Robson had testified on Jackson's behalf, and his testimony was credited in part with exonerating Jackson. The actor Macaulay Culkin, who also had a friendship with Jackson when he was a child, was a star witness for the defense and has long said Jackson never molested him. Now, despite the denials, Culkin's testimony during the trial corroborated Robson and Safechuck's claims of an alarm bell outside Jackson's room. And Culkin, it be notable, was not interviewed in the documentary. Now, Safechuck declined to testify at the Jackson trials we all remember. He alleged in the documentary that Jackson threatened him when he told the musician he wasn't interested in appearing at the trial. Robson and Safechuck both recall feeling jealous when they approached puberty and were quickly replaced by other young boys as Jackson's bestest friends. And it wasn't until recently that Robson fully came to terms with the abuse he suffered. Robson told Today, a venue, back in 2013, he said, "This is not a case of repressed memory. I never forgot one moment of what Michael did to me. but I was psychologically and emotionally completely unable and unwilling to understand that this was sexual abuse. So, leaving Neverland, for myself at least, was an incredibly difficult watch for several reasons, not least because it implicitly condemned the public for watching and accepting Jackson's bizarre public behavior around children in the open for all to see, and writing it off just as an element of his infantile, whimsical personality, or excusing it as resultant of Jackson's own long-rumored abuse by his father, Joe. Jackson constantly surrounded himself with young boys, held their hands in public, freely admitted to sleeping in the same bed with them. Whatever doubt Jackson fans have allowed themselves till now, the HBO documentary utterly demolishes it. The truth be in Wade Robson's eyes, as he discusses how the alleged abuse left him empty, distant, emotionally inert as an adult. The truth be in James Safechuck's shaking hand as he shows the interviewer a ring Jackson gave him when he was a boy during a mock wedding ceremony. And viewers are left to decide for themselves what happens next. Perhaps they'll think of Robson and Safechuck and the other alleged victims whenever a Jackson song comes on the radio. Perhaps they'll stop listening to Jackson's music altogether. Perhaps they'll retreat deeper into fanaticism, as all too many fans be doing. And once again, curse the accusers, accusing the accusers of trying to make a quick buck at a dead singer's expense. It's too early to make a grand pronouncement about what Jackson's legacy will ultimately be in light of this documentary. But I know it won't be the same the day after it was before one views it. Nor will it be the same in the longer sense of social memory as it was before the release of this documentary. So, the documentary itself focuses on the stories of these two men, Wade Robson and James Safechuck, who lay out in gut-wrenching detail stories of how Jackson lured them and their families with his celebrity and then abused them for years in his Neverland mansion. And it paints as a narrative this disturbing picture of how Jackson leveraged his fame as a cudgel against young boys and evaded the murmurs of wrongdoing that dogged him throughout his career, including throughout that very public 2005 child molestation trial. So what happens when musical fandom blurs with religious devotion to a celebrity's art? When Leaving Neverland premiered earlier this year at the Sundance Film Festival in Utah, it was greeted with trepidation, fanfare, and as a security enforcement agent, formerly of that profession myself, I found out it was also greeted by bomb-sniffing dogs. Through my professional connections, though I'm no longer involved professionally in security enforcement, I found that the festival's organizers were worried that fans of Michael Jackson, not the people who had posters of him in their room growing up, or those who have warm memories of dancing to Smooth Criminal at their cousin's wedding, but those who feel personally protective of Jackson's legacy, would reject physically what they had already rejected epistemically. The director, Dan Reed's 4-hour-long documentary telling the stories of Jimmy Safechuck and Wade Robson, both of whom have accused Jackson of molesting them when they were boys. Now, the precautions of Park City may be considered overreactions, and I'm happy to report they turned out to be so, but they neatly presaged what would take place over the last few weekends as the first and second installments of Leaving Neverland aired on HBO. And then the Jackson truthers emerged out of the woodwork, this time in ethereal form. The hashtag MJ innocent trended all over Twitter. Jackson's state, which has steadfastly denied both men's allegations, and which has sued HBO for $100 million United States dollars just for airing the documentary, shared rare video of Jackson in concert, and the footage, a vaguely grainy reminder of Jackson, the performer, at his most dynamic and compelling and, shall we say, creatively ingenious. It be, in all, 2 hours long itself, the precise length of Leaving Neverland's first episode. And the estate's implication be clear: Michael Jackson was a superstar, and superstardom be its own defense. Now, Americans be accustomed to talking about fame using the heady language of the cosmos itself, the celebrity as a celestial truth, situated above us, the superstar as a force in the firmament, all heat and light and gravitational demands. Now, exempli gratia, when I was younger, hard to imagine such a time, and I fell in love with Mila Jovovich. Of course, all of you remember her from Resident Evil, which is pure shit. I adored Mila for portraying Joan of Arc. And in Joan of Arc, what I found myself confronted with was, of course, the wretchedness of the second half of the film, which, of course, focuses on her torments and her trials. But most tormenting of all is when she's visited by God. And, of course, who is God in Joan of Arc? Now, I'm going to try and remember this son of a bitch and his name. Joan of Arc film. Let's look it up, because I've done my best to purge this guy with enough drugs. God of Joan Arc, Mila Jovovich. Mila. Okay, so if we look up who was starred in the film The Messenger, Dustin Hoffman. Dustin Hoffman is this raunchy old Jew who comes in like a Yoda figure, floating above the ground to visit Mila Jovovich, this Serbian thoroughbred, in prison. And what he offers, aside from a total contrast in human species, you can't believe they're of the same species. What he offers is, of course, a vision of absolute stupidity, in which you're wondering, okay, why is this guy God? Couldn't they just use CGI? Couldn't they just, like, do a ball of light? Couldn't they just do a voice? Why has it got to be a raunchy old Jew? And then you got another raunchy old Jew who wrote the book Dancing in the Light, Meryl Streep, who in the television version of Joan of Arc looks absolutely hideous and positively frightening when she comes down as the angel who hands Joan of Arc her sword. And I said, why couldn't they just do a CGI angel looking like, you know, an angel? Like, we all have grown accustomed. I don't care. You know, forget the political correctness. Forget everything for a moment. We are conditioned in general to see angels, you know, pretty much blonde and Nordic looking. You know, variants on the theme, but, you know, we tend to, like, default. And then we get Meryl Streep, who demanded the role. And I'm like, why the fuck? Like, okay. But then it dawns on you. The reason these atrocities of cinema are tolerated, not the film itself or the television film, either one, cinematic or televisual, neither one of them in and of itself is to be damned or dismissed as a film. What is to be damned and dismissed is those scenes in the film that have these idiots portraying divine entities. But why are they in the film to ruin it. Why is the fly in the ointment there? Because it was assumed by the producers that to the Western audiences they were directing the films towards, celebrity be confused with divinity. Celebrity be identified as divinity. So when you see someone who you recognize, of course, I thank the gods, my ancestors, no one today of the younger generation knows who these pukes are. As say, who's the fucking old guy hovering in front of Joan d'Arc? Who's the fucking old lady that they have descending from the sky looking like it's a nightmare vision? All of this, of course, is not going to work with future generations because the star power is fading fast. And that's a good thing, because that's the level of confusion with divinity that expedited, enabled Jackson's environmental form of fame. Music that permeated people's lives. Iconography that saturated American culture. All anticipating this intimate, falsely intimate version of celebrity that be the default today. So it be fitting in that regard that celebrity itself functions as a spectral character throughout the cinematic narrative of the documented Leaving Neverland. Jackson himself was acutely aware of the affordances of fame. He leveraged them. And ultimately, he weaponized them. Joy Robson, Wade's mother, recalls Michael Jackson making a request of her. She recalls as well that when she refused it, he coolly informed her, "I always get what I want." So, Leaving Neverland exposes that on some level, Michael Jackson was absolutely correct. Jackson was introduced to Safechuck and Robson because they were impersonating him. Safechuck in a Pepsi ad, and Robson as a Jackson-inspired dancer in Brisbane, Australia. Both the boys and their families were awed by him, and he led them to believe, Leaving Neverland proves, that his fame could be made transitive. He dangled the promise of celebrity and of fruitful careers in a fickle industry before these families like bits of shimmering bait. In one way, Jackson's insinuation into the boys' lives was deeply personal to the extent that both Stephanie Safechuck and Joy Robson came to think of him, as they say in the documentary itself, as a surrogate son. He'd have dinner at the Safechuck's house in Simi Valley, California, and hours-long phone calls with both the boys and their relations. But these were the bones of show business families. Jackson told Safechuck, who became interested in directing, that he'd help him make the next Steven Spielberg. He'd make him such. Now, according to Robson, Jackson promised him the ability to learn the art of choreography at, literally, Jackson's own feet. And the boys at first couldn't believe their good fortune to orbit round such a cosmic force. Robson recalls thinking of Jackson, my idol and my mentor and my God. And the mingling of the social and the professional, of the artistic, and eventually, allegedly, horrifically, the sexual. The dynamics be similar to those described by people who have spoken out against R. Kelly and Ryan Adams and so many others. Lizette Martinez, one of the women who accused Kelly of physical and emotional abuse, recalls in his documentary, or at least about him, I'm sure he doesn't want that documentary out, but it's entitled Surviving R. Kelly. And in it, Lizette Martinez, she describes lines that blur perniciously. Now, of course, Kelly denies the charges against himself, and Adam's lawyers have denied the allegations against him as well, for Ryan Adams, denouncing all of these as being hurled by grousing, disgruntled individuals, if you can buy that line of shit. And all of this dismissal of victims be possible only in a culture that, despite so much evidence to the contrary, continues to embrace myths of meritocracy, in which a man, rich and powerful, a person whose whims get alchemized via fame into collective truth, tells them that they too be anointed. So within this prison rape culture, you have these glittering cells where the king of pop himself promises Safechuck and Robson that their unique talents will be seen and appreciated and remunerated, meaning they'll make profit, they'll get rich, and above all, they'll be loved, just as his own productions have been. And one of the simmering horrors of the story Leaving Neverland tells be that through Michael Jackson's manipulations of them, Jackson was throughout promising their families a version of justice. So those who defend Jackson, even after all the new information about the singer has come to light, they attempt to turn those long ago promises into an urgent defense by saying they're just in it for the money. That's what they say of the accusers. And this, of course, has its own resonances with many other #MeToo stories. Leaving Neverland is not a balanced work of legal inquiry. Entertainment Weekly called it woefully one-sided, and that its director Reed has asserted from the beginning be by design. He told CBS This Morning last week or the week before that this isn't a film about Michael Jackson. It's a film about Wade Robson and James Safechuck, two little boys to whom this dreadful thing happened long ago. But that focus, however, provided some fodder for the critics by aligning some of the details of Safechuck's and Robson's interactions with the Jackson estate. In particular, the civil suits they filed against said estate. But in an environment that conflates the seeking of justice with the seeking of money, such suits are, of course, no reason to doubt the veracity of the stories the men be telling. On the contrary, one of the gifts Leaving Neverland gives to its subjects and to its audience, one aligned with the gift Surviving R. Kelly and other similar works I've provided of late, be to help dismantle lingering and dangerous assumptions about the perfect victim. Leaving Neverland explores the deeply complicated reasons behind both men's earlier decisions to testify on Jackson's behalf when the star was previously tried for child sexual abuse. Both men suggest that Jackson manipulated their young minds so thoroughly that telling the truth simply wasn't an option. Now, in this context, try to recall the fact that Michael Jackson conducted a mock wedding ceremony with Safechuck when he was 10 years old. And Safechuck relates this experience directly to the camera, holding up with this tremulous hand the diamond and gold band Michael Jackson gave him as evidence of their lifelong romantic bond. And Michael Jackson told Robson that their sexual encounters were a demonstration of love, but that if other people found out about them, other people being ignorant and judgmental, they'd both go to prison for the rest of their lives. And these all too evident manipulations, entwining love and fear and authority and vulnerability, made for another blurring of lines. The documentary exposes that Jackson created an environment in which it became effectively impossible for the boys to tell where Jackson's welfare ended and their own began. In ignoring all that, in emphasizing the not guilty verdicts of the trial, in dismissing the allegations as defamation spurred by greed, the Jackson truthers fall prey to the same myopias that faith-based reasoning will usually involve. But their perspective has a grain of truth. It'd be much easier, after all, simply not to believe. It's intensely preferable to live in a world in which Michael Jackson, the groundbreaker, and the advocate, and the entertainer, and the genius, be innocent. It's much simpler when Billie Jean comes on to give way to the beats you know in your bones, and to dance with joyful abandon, and to sing along to the profoundly familiar voice when he intones, "And Mother always told me, be careful of who you love, and be careful of what you do, 'cause the lie becomes the truth." Now, all of this is what I have dealt with directly on a completely different basis when I'm dealing with educating Americans about losing the Second World War. And they have gone through a Michael Jackson relationship with the federal government all of their lives, in which the federal government has played the role of Michael Jackson, giving them all the social benefits they felt they deserve in exchange for the propagation of a myth that doesn't even make any sense. So anyone who, as a legitimately detached individual, first time hears the story of World War II as it would be relayed by an American, would understand immediately that none of this makes any sense. That everything the Americans say is a lie, that there's no way in hell the Americans could have won World War II. And yet, the Americans, of course, believe it with a fervor that is beyond religious. And that's what brings us to a directly parallel example, just as a momentary tangent, of this so-called Pete Hero Suzuki, the Jap trash piece of shit, whose family sold biofax simulacra for torture practice to the Department of Defense. And now, of course, tries to propagate the Momo Topa, a caricature of myself, as the lethal bane, literally lethal, as in life-taking, bane against children on the internet, in the name of Michael Aquino. So, when you have this idiot speaking to Peter Moon in a thread, who comes to the defense of Michael Aquino as if he's Michael Jackson, and makes various statements about what I've said in the past out of context. Here you've got him saying, and I'll directly quote it, this can be found on Peter Moon's timeline. If you scroll down and look for Peter Moon speaking of the Emperor's speech, you'll see this Jap trash piece of shit and all his entries in the thread. When you open up all the collapsed entries, scroll through the thread itself, The direct quote from Pete Hiro Suzuki says, "Not sure about your allegiance to DDD, or his to you, but he has not provided a single record or photo proving he worked alongside Aquino for a decade. He simultaneously bashes Aquino, yet claims he was out of state during the Presidio molestations." Now I've answered, again in painful detail, all the reality behind Gary Willard Hambright, who Pete Hiro Suzuki also be compelled to defend. When it comes to Michael Aquino, am I confirming that he was out of state during the height of the Presidio molestations? This was not as a child, wherein I was somehow confusing morality and reality and fantasy. This came from the crystal clear professional necessity to relay what was entered on record, that Michael Aquino was stationed in the District of Columbia area in the Virginias, working with the child molesters at West Point. At the time, the real shit was going down at its nadir, its most intense, at the Presidio military base for a period of a year into 2 years, in which I was hemorrhaging to anyone who had an investigative platform what was going down. And at that time, because he was on record, not in area, stationed elsewhere in the United States, in that sense, I, due to professional necessity, was a defendant of Michael Aquino. This has nothing to do with intimidation. This is what was on the record. And then, of course, I had to say off the record that Michael Aquino had every potential for entering on base without checking in with the military police, without being authorized, without being known via the tunnels. All of this I brought up in chilling detail in Satan's Crusaders, which is on the web for anyone to access anytime they wish. So, when you watch Satan's Crusaders, and you can see me confirm all of this, Michael Aquino was on base. I could not legally say that. I could not professionally say that. But I could tell the investigators, if you want to catch them, it's going to be through the tunnels. Now, of course, when they closed the Presidio military base down, they went to great extent to bomb blast the entrances and seal with layer after layer, feet after feet of concrete and steel the tunnels of the Presidio military base, sealing in, potentially for eternity, the skeleton of the many children, young people, kept alive for years, never seeing the outside world, in those prisons beneath the base. And then when Michael Aquino appears anywhere today, compare the responses he gets on anything from his YouTube videos, his interviews, his appearances. Look on YouTube for Michael Aquino. Find him when he's interviewed by Stephen Outrim's affiliates. Lift the Veil, Jan Urban. Anyone who interviews Michael Aquino, you're going to see when he appears thousands of upvotes, hundreds at the least. Glowing commentary like you wouldn't believe. People welcome Michael Aquino the way they do Michael Jackson. He's the Michael Jackson of the American underworld, the undercurrent of the overworld. The people in power who fuck with Epstein are the people who turn to Michael Aquino for their spiritual succor and their philosophical rationalization about what they do. Michael Aquino, like Michael Jackson, will never face justice in this world. Because, just like Michael Aquino, Michael Jackson, as the powerful predators do, hid and hides in plain sight. Jackson included kids in his music videos. Aquino worked by bringing kids on Oprah Winfrey, where he could decimate them in the public eye, make them look like fools, and then take the very people he molested and turn them into whimpering worshippers before the eyes of anyone who would listen. Whether it be Christine Joanna Hart or Solaris Blue Raven. But unlike Michael Aquino, Jackson went further in the sense of securing legacy. Michael Aquino has his legacy. His base is developed. His cult is always with him. Jackson, on the other hand, he had to found a charity aimed at the betterment of children. Michael Jackson took a plot of remote Southern California landscape, its expanse walled off from windswept oaks and sunburnt grass, and turned it into an amusement park and a train station and a zoo. A physical endorsement of the insidious fiction that childhood is merely a state of mind. Michael Jackson named the property Neverland, and it was a work of whimsy that doubled as a character witness. Michael Jackson, his own carefully constructed mythology insisted, was merely a boy at heart, robbed of his own childhood, a sympathetic character who had never gotten around to growing up. What cruel adult would refuse Peter Pan the gift of innocence? So one of the several gutting details Leaving Neverland includes in its story be the extent to which the castle at the heart of Neverland became, for the boys, indistinguishable from a prison in the tunnels beneath Presidio military base. Jackson's residence, as recalled by both Safechuck and Robson, featured a complex of corridors with rooms sealed behind a series of locking doors. Jackson used those architectural features to distance parents from their children and crimes from their discovery. He used the trappings of his power and fame to ensnare people who wanted deeply to trust him. Americans might talk about celebrities as celestial forces, but celebrity is also, as Jackson knew, an infrastructure all its own, an architectural fact around which other truths, whether art or talent or funding or the longings of the human soul, will assemble themselves. Ancient cultures looked to the stars for orientation. We denizens of the modern world do the same. What we haven't figured out yet is what to do when the ground starts to rumble and the sky starts to shake and all around us those stars begin to fall. So just like you saw with Christine Joanna Hart, concerning her inability to detach herself from Michael Aquino or Solaris Blue Raven, wheedling at Aquino's feet when she interviewed he after her anger with my astral involvement with Christine Joanna Hart and sexual experiments and magic. Just so with all the cultists of Michael Jackson, they show us how it's impossible to leave Neverland. Just as those ladies could never leave Michael Aquino. But for we observers, for the rest of you, outside my experience with such victims, it'd be difficult for anyone to reconcile negative information with positive images. The psychologist named Solomon Asch surname spelled ASCH, first demonstrated that we quickly form impressions of others that filter how we process subsequent information. We easily absorb new information that be consistent with those impressions. But inconsistent information presents more of a cognitive challenge, especially when it suggests contradictory information about a person's morals. For instance, learning that a person we regarded as wholesome has cheated. In other words, the way our brain forms impressions of people influences whether we believe new information about them. So how do you, the hoi polloi, reconcile the beloved MJ, one of the best-selling musicians of all time, and the boy you all watched grow up, though he never really did, with the brutality of the allegations against him? One method be to shift responsibility. It wasn't Michael, you all say. 'Twas his own experience as an abused child coming home to roost. However, while children who be abused, neglected, or grow up experiencing adverse events, incontestably have a heightened risk of becoming perpetrators themselves, the overall risk be still relatively small. A researcher named Kathy Spatz-Vidom, her surname spelled W-I-D-O-M, she and her colleagues identified two large groups of children, one with abuse histories and another without, but similar demographic characteristics. When they followed these children into adulthood, they found those who had been abused were more than twice as likely to become abusers compared with the non-abused children. 8.5% compared with 3.3%. Yet, and this be what gets lost, 91.5% of those abused as children do not become child abusers. It'd be difficult to imagine how anyone who has known the trauma of child abuse can inflict that very same agony on someone else. But it'd be very important to remember that the abusers view their victims as objects. And when they engage in abuse, it be entirely without empathy. If we don't blame Michael, perhaps we blame the parents of the boys who failed to protect them from abuse. But countless children have been sexually abused by trusted individuals, family members, coaches, members of the clergy, while parents remain entirely unaware. Many children, such as Wade Robson and James Safechuck, have alleged they are being groomed by their abusers, from seemingly innocuous behaviors to sexual assault, and groomed so insidiously that children may not realize they are being sexually abused, even while it's happening. By the time children understand they're being abused, they themselves feel responsible or guilty for not telling or stopping it sooner, or they may become accustomed to their relationship with the abuser. Threats about the consequences of other people finding out further serve to keep the child from disclosure. Even once parents sense something be wrong, research with mothers has shown that confidence in their suspicions be diminished by many factors, including the belief that it couldn't be because they would have known, because the suspected abuser denies it, and because of what they knew about the suspected abuser, that is, impressions they had already formed. Unfortunately, child sexual abuse happens under the watch of mothers all the time. If we cannot blame someone else, then maybe the alleged victims themselves be lying. After all, why would it take them so long to come forward? Actually, the majority of children who be sexually abused never disclose their abuse as children. And this especially be the case with boys. Why? Grooming and threats play on children's tendency to be egocentric and believe the world revolves around them, that they be the cause of the abuse themselves. Boys may feel additional shame from the violation of masculine norms, which I overcame a long time ago. I'm immune to such insanities. An individual named Scott Easton studied this phenomena in nearly 1,000 adult male members of sexual assault survivor groups. The majority, 62%, had been abused by clergy, 11% by family members. The abuse began, on average, at just under 10 years of age, and lasted well over a year, by the experience of 57% of those so studied. The vast majority of these men did not tell anyone about their sexual abuse during their lifetimes, but on average, it took well over 2 decades to eventually do so whenever they did so, at an average age of 32 years. Nearly 3/4, 75%, never told anyone throughout their childhoods. Spouses or partners, 27%, and mental health professionals, rating at about 20%, were the first people men would tell, far from being outliers. Robson and Safechuck are typical for not making their initial allegations of child sexual abuse until they were adults. So in the end, y'all be left with incongruity. The person you adore appears to have been capable of shattering lives. We can all assume that Robson and Safechuck will be able to move forward with help. Fans will learn valuable lessons about the complexities and frailties of human beings. But even as Michael Jackson's estate fights the allegations, for the King of Pop and his legacy, the story may end differently. But what you don't find in Leaving Neverland be what I'm going to tell you now. The fact that Michael Jackson enjoyed Trump Tower playtime, where R. Kelly lives, pouring out his piss over young girls into their open mouths. Michael Jackson enjoyed playtime with Ivanka, Donald Jr., and Eric Trump, as exposed in their mother's memoir. Celebrities with connections to Michael Jackson be already reeling from explosive child sexual abuse allegations coming out of Leaving Neverland. And these celebrities, as I've articulated, include Corey Feldman, who as a child star was one of the youngsters whose own company, the eccentric King of Pop, famously preferred to any and all adults. Feldman's he's about 47 years old now, still insisting Jackson never molested him. But he's also been forced to spend every day since the release of Leaving Neverland trying to publicly reconcile the sweet, gentle adult friend he claims he knew with the manipulative serial predator exposed by the victims, James Safechuck and Wade Robson. And yet through all of this, noticeably silent in the post-Leaving Neverland debate about Jackson's legacy, be the motherfucking Russian-sucking Putinista presidential puppet, Donald John Trump. And that silence speaks louder than words, considering that Trump and his family enjoyed a long and sustained friendship with Michael Jackson that began in the 1980s. Trump was also one of Michael Johnson Jackson's most famous defenders, after the singer was accused of molesting boys in 2 separate cases, both in 1993 and 2003. So Michael Joseph Jackson, I said Michael Johnson there. Michael Joseph Jackson was rabidly defended in public and on record by Donald John Trump, the man who would become your puppet president, when, of course, he was on Larry King. Now, this was Trump continuing to speak up for Michael Jackson after Michael Jackson died in 2009. Very similar to Michael Aquino, still defending Gary Willard Hambright to this day, decades after Gary Willard Hambright died and be gone. The man who was federally indicted by a federal grand jury for over 14 assaults, all of them against children under 4 years of age. Gary Willard Hambright, the Baptist minister, my commercial art instructor, at John O'Connell Vocational Institute. Here we have a son of a bitch defended by Stephen Alrim, who claims John O'Connell was not in the location I described it in. But of course, the original John O'Connell, in which Gary Willard Hambright kept all of his child pornography, maintaining it on-site San Francisco Unified School District property. That John O'Connell on Treat and Harrison Street in the Mission District, which people can verify was there on their own, was demolished to hide all evidence in terms of preventing scandal within the San Francisco Unified School District. John O'Connell, a new one, was built, relocated on the other side of the San Francisco Peninsula. And it's this place that Stephen Alrim claims John O'Connell has always been. A lie, as all the lies that are told by my detractors, my designated gang stalkers, the Aquino cultists. And when you find their lies to be such, take with them the attitude they try to pin on myself. Once a liar, always a liar. And when it comes to Stephen Alrim defending Gary Willard Hambright along his master Michael Aquino, after the death of this man decades ago, reflect now on Donald John Trump in the year 2009. Well after that, as a matter of fact, with Michael Jackson buried in the dirt, and you've got our man Donald Trump himself, then a star in the Michael Jackson sense, on the set of Celebrity Apprentice, telling Larry King that Michael Jackson was definitively, I'm going to quote Donald Trump verbatim, not a molester. I'm certain of that. And Donald John Trump recalled to Larry King the times he and Michael Jackson shared at Trump Tower in New York City, where Trump confirmed Michael Jackson lived for extended periods of time. Trump also said Jackson was a regular guest at his Mar-a-Lago resort in Palm Beach, Florida, where, of course, Trump said he brought him there specifically to, quote-unquote, entertain the kids. So here you have a man expediting a serial child predator and bragging about it. And about Jackson, Donald John Trump, your president, said to Larry King, he was a terrific guy and a wonderful guy. Now, it's likely that DJ Trump and MJ Jackson bonded over being rich and famous and their shared interests in cultivating flamboyant, over-the-top personas and lifestyles, but it's just as likely they also bonded over their love of kids. Both of them were fucking Donald Trump's daughter, Ivanka. Well, Donald was. Jackson preferred the boys. So he was stuck with Donald Jr. The one they both were fucking might have been Jared Kushner, who, of course, was a girl at the time, then became a man later. Now, it turns out that Michael Jackson himself, now, I want to make it sound as legal as possible, Michael Joseph Jackson. It turns out that Michael Joseph Jackson was also friendly with all the other members of the Trump family. This is confirmed by Donald Trump's first wife, Ivana Trump. During Michael Jackson's residency in Trump Tower in the late 1980s, he spent quite a bit of time in the Trump family triplex. And Ivana Trump wrote all about this in her 2017 memoir entitled Raising Trump. Now, I've actually gone to the effort of purchasing that book, making certain that I read it so I could understand where this woman was coming from. And I can assure you that it's just as disturbing as watching Leaving Neverland. Honestly, I can't really describe how repulsive an experience, a reading experience, that it proved itself to be. But I'm going to do my best to provide some justice to a subject that to me is like analyzing a stool sample, looking for traces of blood or signs of colon cancer. So in this book, Ivana Trump confirms that then 30-year-old Michael Jackson much preferred to hang out with their children, Donald Jr., Ivanka, and Eric, than he did with she herself or her husband. Ivana Trump confirms that Michael Jackson was a regular visitor during her children's play dates. At the time, Donald Jr., Ivanka, and Eric were around 12, 8, and 5 years of age, respectively. Ivana Trump wrote, I will quote this from the book, "The only person who had an open invitation to come to the triplex for playdates whenever he wanted was Michael Jackson. The King of Pop lived in Trump Tower and was a good friend of the whole family. He'd stop by and chat with Donald and me for but a few minutes, and then he'd go up to the kids' floor and hang out for hours and hours. Throughout the night. Throughout the night. I mean, that's like, motherfucker. Like, really? Really? Now, Ivana Trump says Jackson and her children would watch MTV, play Mario Brothers, and Tetris, and use logos to build, what else? A miniature Trump Tower. Actually, it was really a phallus, kind of like the pricks, the dildos that everybody was sending to the militia over at the Mueller Bird Observatory. But, you know, same difference. Now, Ivanka Trump apparently didn't see anything problematic about Jackson's interest in being with the children. She writes in this book, Michael was just a 30-year-old kid. He could relate to Ivanka and the boys better than to us. But given that Ivana Trump's memoir was published 8 years after Jackson's death, when the child sex abuse allegations had become a regular and indispensable part of the conversation about him, Ivana Trump neglects to talk about leaving him alone with the kids throughout the night, what rationalization she might have had. Instead, she relates how she remembers Jackson creating a near riot when he attended Ivanka's school performance of The Nutcracker. Oh my God, what an apropos title. Well, apparently at the The Nutcracker, one of Ivanka Trump's fellow ballerinas heard Jackson was coming to the show and came up with the idea that all the dancers should wear one white glove in honor of the pop star's signature style. Now, Ivana Trump writes, the teachers were horrified, and the teen dancer was taken to task for even thinking of compromising the costumes of the production. Ivanka was mortified to be the indirect cause of the tension, but she didn't let it affect her performance. I'm sure that Donald said that in bed, too. Yeah, you know, she was mortified, but she didn't let that affect her performance. In any case, Michael Jackson told Ivana Trump that Ivanka looked like an angel that night. And there we go. So Michael Jackson's defenders are starting to sound like conspiracy theories. The Michael Jackson Be Innocent industrial complex isn't so different from QAnon Pizzagators. As I myself was watching Leaving Neverland, you've got this documentary rolling before my eyes, focusing on James Safechuck and Wade Robson, relating Michael Jackson's their experiences of he raping them when they're children. And through it, I most certainly experienced a barrage of thoughts and emotions, but never once did I ever think, I wonder if he really did it. I noticed that the testimony of the two accusers, plus a massive amount of supporting evidence, overwhelmingly confirms the fact that Michael Jackson did. Now, contributing to this reality be that every bit of evidence that be in any way ambiguous be easily explained sans any large logical leap. I know it's that Safe Chuck and Robson be telling the truth. It's all over their faces, in their words, in the details, and in all the supporting evidence. It's also all in keeping with what we all know about child molestation, the dynamics of abuse, and the legal system, which I've articulated to you in excruciatingly painful detail. So to enumerate the three major areas of defense of Michael Jackson. 1, there are many young men Jackson didn't molest. 2, Wade Robson testified under oath that Michael Jackson didn't molest him, raising the question, was he lying then, or be he lying now? The answer, of course, be then, motherfuckers. And 3, Robson and Safe Chuck be after the money. Now, the issue of these two accusers' financial motivations be at the center of the campaign to discredit them. Michael Jackson's defenders take the notion of a perfect victim to an extreme. They seem to demand that the only believable Michael Jackson accuser be one who suffers abuse from one of the wealthiest entertainers of all time without ever seeking any recompense for years of therapy, costly, as you can imagine, astronomically so, if you've ever seen a psychiatrist yourself, throughout all their years of anguish, and their personal, and ultimately, what one must presume to be professional paralysis. Most people who are thus abused usually become unemployable. So the director of Leaving Neverland, Dan Reed, has acknowledged that his subjects have and are suing Michael Jackson because victims of abuse be entitled to compensation from their abusers. The wrongly convicted be entitled to money from the state. Users of defective products get money from companies. People discriminated against in the workplace get money from their employers. So the main purveyors of the money argument be the lawyers for the Jackson estate. The attorney's motivation be to protect the estate's huge pile of shit-fuck money. That doesn't discredit the attorney's arguments in and of itself, but we can't think of this as a smoking gun of witness impeachment. If we believe the attorney's arguments, then we are believing the argument of people being paid to argue that you can't believe the arguments of people who are in it for the pay. Can you wrap your fucking brains around that one? Now, in addition to the attorneys, thousands of people be eager to defend their god, Michael Jackson. In some cases, these people be related to the Jackson family, like Taj Jackson, son of Michael's brother, Tito. Taj told Sky News in an interview, I can tell you, I've been around people where I've just gotten that energy, and it's an energy that you're like, that's a bad person, I'll stay away from them. And if I think I ever felt that way about my uncle, just one hint of it, I wouldn't be here defending him. I wouldn't. Now, I myself have no reason to believe that Taj's motives are about anything but the sincere belief that his dead uncle be innocent. But he neatly elides the fact that his fortunes, as well as his father's, be tied to the reputation of Michael Jackson. Taj and Tito be recording artists and entertainers. To the extent that the public has any interest in their output, it be certainly due to their association with beloved musical superstar Michael Jackson and nothing else, as they themselves be absolutely talentless. So once that association becomes connected to the reviled child molester Michael Jackson, their earning potentials will plummet too. It doesn't disqualify them from making an argument, mind you, but it informs the argument. So far, the most prominent print piece to defend Michael Jackson ran in Forbes magazine. The people who bring you the Forbes millionaires list, among other things. And this piece was writ by the music journalist Joe Vogel. And to quote T, as someone who has done an enormous amount of research on the artist, interviewed many people who were close to him, and been granted access to a lot of private information, my assessment be that the evidence simply does not point to Michael Jackson's guilt. Well, Vogel hadn't even seen the documentary when he wrote that. His Twitter feed be filled with people who knew Jackson well and say they never, ever thought that Jackson would in any way harm a child. In other words, he's quoting people who, if they be wrong, were blind to or countenanced child molestation. That's a motivation there. In other words, people who are child molesters themselves. The kind you find in Trump Tower, where all the alleged rapists seem to live. So Vogel focuses on the dynamic that here be a black man accused, and the public, if they believe Leaving Neverland, be believing white accusers. Vogel himself writing, it's no accident that one of Jackson's favorite books and movies was To Kill a Mockingbird, a story about a black man named Tom Robinson, destroyed by false white allegations. That could be your favorite book, and you also could have abused little boys. Still, Vogel goes on to write, I quote his T, dozens of individuals who spent time with Jackson as kids continue to assert nothing sexual ever happened. This includes hundreds of sick and terminally ill children, such as Bella Farkas, for whom Jackson paid for a life-saving liver transplant, and Ryan White, whom Jackson befriended and supported in his final years battling AIDS. Okay, so Jackson didn't sexually abuse kids who would give him AIDS or who were so sick they were on life support. You know, it is hard to get it up and fuck a person on life support. I haven't tried it myself, but it looks pretty difficult. In fact, it doesn't look like it's worth the effort, and that it would, you know, hurt, if not the recipient of the affections. It would certainly hurt the person with all the plastic pins pricking out from this person that, you know, you could prick yourself, etc. It's just not something, you know, that would be pursued by anybody seeking any gratification. So when it comes to all of that, I myself, you know, it could run into my favorite porno actress, and if she were in that connection where, you know, she had full-blown AIDS, I wouldn't be fucking her either. So it's also important to remember that Jackson, in not sexually abusing White or Farkas, the liver transplant recipient and the kid dying of AIDS, he met these people like motherfucking twice. I'm talking like twice, if that, each. And it's like, not that he had time, aside from their baseline conditions themselves being a total turnoff, there's a sense of timing involved. So, in all of that, we are left with kind of just a complete befuddlement on my own part for how anyone could listen to this and not break out just laughing at the presumption that you would actually eat this shit up. I mean, how can anyone be the recipient of this level of bullshit and actually say this is even worth responding to? I myself wasn't surprised at the weakness of Vogel's argument because I myself have a pretty low opinion of Forbes magazine. And that inkling aligns with another feeling that I was having as I evaluated the arguments of the Michael Jackson defenders. Because they're all parallel the impassioned online rambling of the QAnon Pizzagators, or the absolutely unhinged Hillary is a sex trafficker types. The QAnon crowd, if you remember they. Their screens flash and blink, their clip art grates, their sentences are always ungrammatical. Their YouTube videos go on forever. And their Twitter names have 4 emoji in them. So it's quite telling that in these weeks in which Leaving Neverland was the dominant topic of cultural conversation, in which Slate magazine alone has published over 20 pieces about the documentary and the charges, that there has yet to emerge in any bona fide journalistic outlet even one cogent defense of Michael Jackson from the charges of abuse. Now, perhaps I myself am being a snob. An argument needn't be exquisitely crafted for it to be true. On the other hand, it's like all those miracle cures available only in this exclusive TV offer. If it really worked, don't you think doctors would use it? Wouldn't America's retailers want in on these amazing products? When an argument comes packaged in a dented and soggy box, it somehow invites skepticism. Appearances do count. So when I'm confronted with these arguments, presented as they are, in the most insane fashion, I'm left speechless by how people would eat the cereal out of this dented and soggy box. Why would they even pour it when, as it comes out, as in the days when I lived in the Tenderloin ghetto, when we poured our cereal out, we'd have wriggling roaches that would come out amongst the flakes instead of raisins. That's how these arguments present themselves. And it's because of that, when I see other people eating them, stuffing those roaches into their mouths and apparently enjoying it, I get physically ill. So I'm not quite sure how all of these guys go on and they're able to keep selling what they're selling. I mean, just smell the shit you're cooking and it causes one to gag. But people keep eating the shit. Nevertheless, when the argument comes poorly packaged, it doesn't mean the argument be bad in and of itself. But if it were any good, wouldn't someone with a little more credibility put it forward? A better journalist might pursue it. It would get play in a higher quality publication. Instead, the Michael Jackson Be Innocent industrial complex be churning out medium ramblings and extensive hit jobs from YouTube, which cites a post Robson made on social media about the power of visualization and asserting that such practices caused him to concoct stories about Jacksonian abuse. In a different age, one of gatekeepers and professional standards, such ideas wouldn't be entertained, and the shoddy aesthetic around them would be an indictment of their credibility. But gatekeepers now be considered undemocratic, and professionalism itself be considered elitist. Gatekeepers kept marginalized voices from being heard. That be true. Some of those marginalized voices were and are truth tellers from oppressed communities. The overwhelming majority be wackadoo conspiracists, oppressed by a series of real-life acquaintances who have smiled and walked away very slowly, backing away without taking their eyes off the lunatic. Now, one of the things that I need to bring to attention, of course, to my lovely volcano crown princess across the Pacific, be that she's speaking to me while I'm transmitting. So I just want to bring that to her attention. I don't think she's aware of it, and I should be off transmission sometime soon, in the very near future, but do need to bring that up right now because she is sending me some messages. So let's get that out of the way. And kiss under her. Hopefully that doesn't, shall we say, put her off. I still have to, of course, talk to Ramona Halitha Henry about republishing her post and making certain that I enter in thread the Momo joke that she found so offensive before. So what I need to get back into with our narrative at hand, the concept of our, shall we say, presentation of argument. So I do believe that the vast majority of people who watched the documentary that I've been alluding to, or shall we say, addressing in detail, I do believe that the majority of people who have reviewed it or thought much about any of the allegations against Jackson over all these years have come to the conclusion of mine own. This guy's guilty. No need to dedicate my life to it. But for people who insist on believing, and I emphasize the word believe, that Jackson's innocent, it's become a cause. Now, 3 years ago, if I had personally encountered troves of weirdly packaged, poorly argued, strangely formatted, amateurish defenses of Michael Jackson, I'd have regarded that as an indication that there aren't any good defenses for Michael Jackson. I'd have actually evaluated this evidence and found that it comes up lacking, not just in presentation, but in substance. And that's exactly what I've done with the Michael Jackson Popular Defense Front tonight. The poor difference be that back then, I would take all these wild claims and conclude that their ungodly amateurish presentation be indicative that the Michael Jackson be innocent side of the argument was failing. Only unserious people were taking it seriously. Now I cannot afford to immediately come to that conclusion. The defenders, like the Pizzagate folks, have advantages in terms of virality and resilience that I had never counted on before. Connected and impassioned just might beat staid and correct factuality. So Michael Jackson's misdeeds are incontrovertibly appalling. The rebuttals to Michael Jackson's misdeeds be in shambles. But the fact that this ham-handed and tawdry propaganda campaign may very well be enough to prevent us all from achieving consensus be what actually depresses me. And that's what brings us out of the realm of the culture of our prison rape society to jurisprudence. Because this be the same reason why Trump's supporters will believe any lie he tells. From Kavanaugh to Khashoggi, Trump cultists be immune to truth. President Donald Trump has been bending and breaking laws all of his life. Michael Cohen, his longtime personal lawyer, stated under oath that Trump directed him to violate federal campaign finance law. The state of New York itself has evidence that Trump and his family have been cheating on their taxes for years. The Trump dynasty's persistently illegal conduct and repeated and willful self-dealing transactions have led the New York Attorney General to file a lawsuit against the Trump Foundation. The list goes on and on forever. We don't have that long. I don't have the patience. Trump, in turn, be quite open about his disdain for law. In April, he told an audience in Michigan last year that our laws are so corrupt and so stupid they don't need to be followed. Trump be also clear about why he be breaking these laws. The entire point of Trump's campaign to Make America Great Again, hashtag MAGA, be to lead us back to a time before the civil rights movement, before laws against insider trading, before the New Deal and federal agencies that regulate the commerce of plutocrats, peoples who govern by money. This was an era of all-white, all-male supremacy. The rich paid no income taxes, and there was no minimum wage. So the wealthy lived as royalty. Trump's thinking be akin to the way past activists viewed sit-down strikes. Like these past civil dissenters, Trump views himself as breaking the laws that he doesn't believe should exist, which includes most of the laws and regulations put in place since the 1930s. Indeed, instead of preparing traditional legal defense, Trump be confounding legal observers by doing things that, by all objective standards, should make matters worse. He obstructs justice openly. In fact, in vowing to fight back against the Mueller investigation, Donald Trump announced his intention to continue obstructing the probe. He also continually changes his story. First, he denies everything. I have nothing to do with Russia. Then he says there would be nothing wrong